Okay, students, so this is our next video in the series of independent learner videos for A-level English language. This one is on discourse. That's like a way of talking about sort of structure and types of language, and rhetoric, which is sort of can be seen as an element of semantics, can be seen as an element of structure. Rhetoric, the idea of how you say something, rhetorical techniques, the way in which you say something, the way in which you write something. Often trying to be persuasive and how we change our language to seem to be more persuasive or knowledgeable. Okay, so we're only going to be a very quick video today. We're just going to have a look through the booklet. I'm just going to explain these different discourse structures to you in the booklet. Obviously, you might not need the video. You can just work through, but you do have to memorize them for the test. Okay, so the structure of a text is really, really important. If you think about the news, for example, if you're watching a 1 hour news program or a half-hour news program like the news at 9, news at 10, something like that, there is a sense in which the structure is as important as the content. So we know that the most important story goes first. We know that there's usually a funny little story about a dog on a skateboard to finish, and we've got the sport sort of second to last. And things similarly with the newspaper, the structure of the newspaper tends to be news stories that have the purpose to inform, then it tends to be opinions, then it tends to be sort of things like obituaries and magazine articles and other stranger stories and even sort of advertisements. Then it tends to be the sport at the back. So lots and lots of importance placed on structure in texts, and these are some terms to describe structure. I've also had a couple of comments of people saying, "What is wrong with your finger?" I'm making all these videos at the same time, the back end of the last academic year, and I trapped my finger in a car door. So apologies if it's horrible for you to look at. It was much worse for me, believe me, actually doing it. Just try not to focus on how manky my finger looks at this moment. So let's quickly go to structure. I'm just going to explain this. So narrative discourse. Discourse essentially means like a structure. It can be used in other ways as well, but essentially here we're using it to mean structure. So a narrative structure would mean like an account of events, like a story. Yeah, so personal stories, or there's like a beginning, middle, and end. You can tell things as if they are a story. Expository is about information, so it explains an idea as you sort of expositing, so expository text. So something like an informative text, like a textbook, a Wikipedia page, it's structured in order to deliver information and explain ideas about it. So you probably have the big idea first, and you might even have subheadings. It's trying to give inform as its main sort of purpose there. The next one would be procedural, so a procedure, so guiding the reader like a series of steps, step by steps. So you could have something structured like almost like a flow chart or a flow diagram, something like, I don't know, something like a recipe could be procedural. Difficult to say. Hortatory discourse. So this is often sort of commanding in tone, so you might see lots of imperatives in there, commanding you to take a particular form of action or adapting a particular viewpoint, the way some speeches or feature articles motivate people to act. So, do it now, don't delay, fill in your tax receipts or whatever. So this sense of this hortatory sort of almost commanding lots of imperatives and stuff, okay? Next one would be chronological. This word will come up in lots and lots of subjects, sort of means in time order. So some autobiographies, some novels, some other types of texts are often in the order in which they happened, but you might have other ones with sort of non-chronological in structure, where you might have flashbacks, etc. Okay. Next one is general to specific. So you begin with general details and then more specific detail as you read. So if you think about things like a newspaper article, the informed newspaper articles in the first few pages of a newspaper will have the entire story summed up in one paragraph to start with, and then further details what, where, when, how, etc. As we go through. So that would be sort of a general to specific structure. Question and answer then is often used in things like interviews, so almost like a Q&A structure, repeated patterns of question and answers, so interviews, and there's often a sort of power difference here as well, sort of what we call an asymmetrical power relationship, power asymmetry. The person asking the questions tends to be the person in the position of power, even though they speak less, which is quite interesting. And then problem solution, so sometimes persuasive texts work like this as well, and advertising works like this, so they'll present something as as if it's a problem, and then they'll give you the solution. So, concerned about your mortgage, try this new loan site, something like that. So building up a problem and then giving you the solution. So, the problem is bad breath, so the product is shown to be part of the solution, so it can be part of this persuasive. So some of these are more expected in formative, some are more expected in guides and advisory, and some of them are expected in persuasive. Okay, so you do need to memorize those because the test is going to be on those structures. There's 1, 2, 3, there's 8 to learn. Okay, let's go over the page then. We've got some rhetorical structures. Now rhetoric in its broader sense is sort of like not what you say, but how you say it. So if this discourse structure is about the organisation of what you say or what you write, rhetoric is about the way in which you say it or the way in which you write. So we're going to try and get you to learn these different terms, and that involves me saying them without making any mistakes, which is not particularly easy. Now, everybody knows the rhetorical question, okay? But the rhetorical question is merely one rhetorical feature. There are many, many, many. And if you go on the internet, I mean, my advice is don't really on rhetoric, because there are literally hundreds of different rhetorical devices. So rhetoric is often a means of sort of being persuasive or sounding good, and so it's often politicians, and it was sort of the ancient Greeks who invented it, who used different rhetorical features. So the first one is an interrogative that doesn't require an answer. So to sort of put across a particular position or be persuasive. This one's called hyperphora. I feel a little bit like I'm sort of teaching at Hogwarts doing this. Hyperphora. It's sort of ancient Greek, a lot of the words, because they were well into sort of, persuasive technique and political discussions and things like that. So hyperphora, so that's sort of answering one's own question for an effect. It's sort of what made this trip to Africa. There is no quick explanation. So you almost set up a rhetorical question, but then answer it, or you set up a question and then answer it. Okay, procatalepsis. Okay, procatalepsis or prosatalepsis is anticipating an objection. So you won't like this, but, or now you're not going to agree with me over here. However, I know what you're thinking, but not now. Look, you're going to say this, but whatever. So you might even find that some of your teachers do this. Now you know you want to say this, but just hold on a second. You know you don't like it, but. So that procatalepsis is that idea of anticipating an objection and then saying, yeah, but I've got the solution. Parallelism just sort of literally means anything where we sort of a structure in syntax or a pair of words or phrases or clauses for effect. Often you get rhythm as well. So I came, I saw, I conquered. You've got the repetition of the same syntactical structure of the first person pronoun and then the verb. And that same structure is repeated in parallel. Immature poets imitate, mature poets steal. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So it's sort of a form of repetition, but you're sort of repeating structures, and so we can talk about parallel structures and parallelism. Okay, anaphora is sort of the use of a phrase at the beginning of a successive clause. So I have a dream, I have a dream. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight in the France, fight on the seas and the oceans. So there's perhaps a particular phrase that you're using again and again and again that's coming up again and again, often found throughout a political speech. Epistrophe is another type of repetition, and this is where you're repeating a word or phrase at the end of a clause. So the sort of end-focused repetition is what we're talking about with epistrophe. And it's sort of, if you look at these examples, youth is not enough, love is not enough, success is not enough. That type of repetition sort of leads us to thinking quite formal, quite sort of structured and formal, like what are we going to then say is enough? Something's going to come up, So it's quite a strong one. The next one is what we call incrementum, sort of climax or incrementum, increasing, so literally building up. So arranging the words so they build up in order of importance. We're trying to build it up, give it this ad incrementum, sort of developing all the way through. I think we've reached a point of great decision, not just for our nation, not only for humanity, but for life upon the earth. Not just this, not just that, but for this. So it's another form of sort of end focus in terms of the sentence, this incrementum building up. And then use of antithesis or antithetical structures, so where we juxtapose or sort of contrast opposites, weak versus strong, many versus few. You know, so often in political speeches they'll sort of almost in a fake way build up two opposing views, or almost to like sort of what we call like straw men, sort of like mischaracterizations of two very opposed things, and say, oh, we're for that one or that one, or even two opposed things, and we're the ones who want to compromise. Okay, so we need to learn all of those. So what I advise is that you look back in through these, and you try to find examples of each in texts, or look up the actual term and try and sort of make it make sense to you, put a definition that makes sense to you into your glossary, and perhaps some of your own examples. The test is going to be on these as well. Okay, and then finally some other basic structures. So these might be sort of graphological sort of features, but it could also be things like heading and subheading, introductions and conclusions. Essays tend to have them. Openings and closings, often those are sort of formally stipulated, so you tend to have a conventional opening for a formal letter. Dear Mr. Ahmed, a speech you might, or even a lesson, you might expect any questions at the end, a closing. What we call greeting and valediction, so conventional greetings such as good morning and farewells, and the different ways they're sort of used in spoken and written discourse. So greeting and valediction, sort of opening and closing in that sense. And then small print. So a lot of text will literally have some small print at the end, which sort of it gives more detail in terms of what's been said within the main body of the text. So that's it, okay? So you need to learn your 8 different types of structures for the text, okay? And you need to learn your rhetorical terms, okay? And then you need to also learn some other possible structure terms as well. The test's going to cover all of these, and so best way to do it is add some more to your glossary.